All right, well, it's good to be here with y'all again today. Are you afraid of death? Do you fear dying? And why is that? Today we're going to look at Psalm 16. It's a psalm written by David. If you just want to turn there with me, I'll be reading in the ESV. A Miktam of David. Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. As for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out, or take their names on my lips. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. This is the word of the Lord. So today I'm going to be just going through this chapter, verses 1 through 11, fleshing out what I see this chapter as meaning, and then we're going to be looking at some connected passages and looking a little bit at this concept of death and of what comes with death. So the main idea that I see in this chapter is that amidst present and future threats to his integrity and promised dynasty, David believes Yahweh will preserve his faithful one through life and death, and anticipates abundant and eternal resurrected life. I'll say that one more time. Amidst present and future threats to his integrity and promised dynasty, David believes Yahweh will preserve his faithful one through life and death, and anticipates abundant and eternal resurrected life. So before we get into the chapter, I want to situate it a little bit. As we know, the Old Testament is broken up in three parts: the law, the prophets, and the writings. The law is where we have God giving the covenant to his people. It's the covenant established. The prophets are where we have the covenant enforced. And the writings are where the covenant is enjoyed, where the covenant is acting in the land and the people are enjoying that covenant. The book of Psalms comes within the writings, where the covenant is being enjoyed. However, there are still troubles in the land, and the various psalmists' primary theme is a hope for a Redeemer Messiah who would establish Yahweh's kingdom forever. Within the book of Psalms, there is a movement. From the beginning, there's 5 books in Psalms, and from the beginning of Psalms to the end, it progresses from mostly lament psalms till by the time you get to the end of the book of Psalms, mostly praise psalms. So the beginning, there's a lot of despair with some hope and some praise. By the time you get to the end, there's a little bit of despair, mostly hope, mostly praise. And all along, the book is building hope and trust in this promised Messiah. In book 1, where Psalm 16 is situated, the recurring pattern of book 1 is the tribulation and triumph of the anointed king. Previously, before Psalm 16, Psalm 13 waits for God's salvation. Psalm 14 speaks of God's coming retribution on evil oppressors. And Psalm 15 asks the question, who can dwell in God's presence? How is it possible for a human to dwell in God's presence? Psalm 16 then fits right in with this focus on Yahweh's presence. And it trusts in Yahweh's preservation, His provision, and His presence, despite apostasy in the land and unavoidable death that threatens to wipe away the messianic hope. And I'll flesh all this out as we go through this. After Psalm 16, Psalm 17 and 18 talk about Psalm 17, the psalmist is praying for and believing in God's justice. And in Psalm 18, he is giving thanks for God's faithful deliverance. So the whole theme, each psalm has its own power and meaning. We're going to hone in on Psalm 16. But that's just situating it a little bit within the book. So let's jump in with verses 1 and 2. David starts with a plea. He starts with, "Preserve me, O God. Keep me safe, God. Preserve me." I very well could have named this message, "Keep Yourselves in the One Who Keeps You," Part 4. Even though it's not Jude, the theme is actually very, very similar. And the reason I say that is this word, preserve me, it's the Hebrew word shamar, keep. Keep the commandments of God. Keep in His way. Keep the law. This is the word that's used for keep the law. You know what else it's used for? It's used for God keeping His covenant. So keeping is a covenant word. God, in Deuteronomy 7:9, we see that God keeps His covenant in steadfast love with those who keep His commandments. Here it's like David is reminding God of His covenantal promise. Keep me safe, O God. Remember, You are the covenant keeper, God. Keep me. There's some danger afoot. And then he says that he has already taken refuge in God. Where the English says, "For in You I take refuge," that's actually a perfect verb, which is a completed thing. It's like, I have taken refuge in You. I have already done it. I've already thrown myself on You, God. Keep Your end of the deal. Basically, like, I've taken refuge in You. Now keep me. So David is saying, I need You to keep me. I'm in danger. You are the keeping God. You promise to keep those who keep Your commandments. Later I'm going to come back to this covenantal theme and show why it's so central and important for this chapter. But let's move to verse 2. Verse 2, David reminds himself that he himself has declared Yahweh, full caps, Lord. So Yahweh. as his only Lord, not caps, Adonai, which is like Lord and Master. So we see, if you see there, I say to the Lord, that Lord is all caps, the divine name, Yahweh. You are my Lord, that one is Adonai, which means Lord and Master. So David is like telling himself here, this is what I'm saying to God. You are my Lord and Master. You are sovereign over me. You are the one in control. And then he says, I have no good beside you. I have no good apart from you. I have no good except for you. Nothing. You are my only good, Lord. So there's some kind of a desperation here. David's like, keep me, God. And then he says that he's taking refuge in God. And he says that he has no good apart from God. What's going on? Why is David feeling this danger, this fear, this need for refuge? Now, verse 3 is really tricky. The ESV sadly translates it in a way that makes the saints and the excellent ones look like good people, ones in whom David is delighting, and then the ones in verse 4 who run after another god as a separate group of people. But the literal translation of Hebrew says, as for the holy ones, so this is actually my own translation, but the Hebrew reads a lot clearer than the ESV here. And I don't want to confuse you all. The ESV translation still works very well. It just brings out the meaning a lot more powerfully, I think, with the Hebrew. So the Hebrew says, as for the holy ones who are in the land, they and the nobles in whom I delighted, I used to delight in them, their troubles are multiplying. They are running after another god. They acquire another god. So it would be easy to mistake this in reading the English that David has another good besides Yahweh. He just got done saying, I have no good apart from you, Yahweh. And then he goes on to say, the saints in the land and the excellent ones, or the nobles, whom I am delighting in the English. But the picture here is actually that these saints, these people who were holy, these people who had been following after God, who David had been delighting in, they too have run after other gods. They too have committed apostasy. Between 3 and 4, in the Hebrew there's no indication that the subject switches. In fact, 4 just starts, they run after another god. And so it's far clearer in the Hebrew that the saints and holy one, or the holy ones and the nobles. So here we have like the religious leaders, the priests, the Levites, and the noble ones, the political leaders. They are running after another god, and their sorrows are multiplying. They're acquiring another god, and their sorrows are multiplying. It says the net. I'll read the Net Bible translation just for a little bit of clarity there, if that's confusing. So this is how the Net Bible translates it. As for God's chosen people who are in the land, and the leading officials I admired so much, their troubles multiply. They desire another god. So you see there, it's clearly the same subject. So this is the danger. Essentially, this is at least part of the danger that David is so concerned about in verse 1. Keep me, God. Keep me in your covenant. Why is it so important that God keeps him? Because all these other people in the land are not keeping within the covenant. They're running after other gods. And this is a threat to David's personal integrity. When everybody around you is running away after other gods, acquiring other gods, it's a huge temptation to follow them. And with later kings, we see this again and again and again and again, where they turn after other gods and follow these other gods and take the nation with them. And David is crying out, "No, Lord, I don't want to go there. I want to stay with you." And he's resolute. I will not pour out drink offerings of blood. I will not take their names on my lips. Truly, David's only good is in Yahweh. Where is our trust? Who are we relying on? Is it God? Or are we relying on fickle humans or our own idolatrous desires as our good thing? I have seen a number of Christians fall away from the faith in anger and in bitterness. Why? Because they were trusting in some Christian leader, maybe, in some pastor, in some person, or church system. And when it collapsed or failed them, they became disillusioned, walked away from God, and called it all false, and just left it all. Their trust was in the system or in the people. Their trust may have been in that dynamic, charismatic leader. But it wasn't in God, because God never fails. Our trust must be in God, not in our church system, not in the Followers of the Way church, not in the Followers of the Way leaders, not in our own ability here at Malden Towers to sort things out amongst ourselves. In God alone. That's where our trust must be. Notice how, I think verse 4 brings out how that we are all longing to worship something, whether it is the true God or something else. And 2, so first, we're all longing to worship something. And second, this worship results in either finding refuge and good or in troubles and sorrows. Beloved, who or what are we worshiping? Are we worshiping God? Are we running after? Are we throwing ourselves on God like David did for preservation, for keeping? Are we keeping His commandments? Or are we running after the idols of our day, the prosperity, the materialism, the postmodern ideas, the whatever it is, you name it, fill in the blank, whatever it is that comes between you and God? If we are finding refuge, if we're running to God, if we're worshiping God, we will have refuge and we will have good. If we're running after idols, anything other than God, our sorrows will be multiplied. We will have troubles. All right, verses 5 and 6. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. So what's going on here? what does it mean that the Lord is a chosen portion and the Lord is my cup? And these lines, what's going on? This is inheritance, land inheritance language. In Joshua, where the Israelites are dividing out the land to the 12 tribes, all of these words are used. Portion, lot, lines, inheritance. I don't think cup is used, but the rest of those words are all used there in this concept of land inheritance, allotted spaces where people are given to live in, to dwell in. And not only that, these spaces are fertile and pleasant. They're good lands that are producing much. And the idea of getting this land inheritance is not only that I'm receiving something good from God, but I'm receiving future stability. I'm receiving economic well-being. I'm receiving all of this lasting sustenance and future security. Good, fertile land brings health and wealth to people. However, the point is not that it's actual land inheritance. There may be some of that, but that's not David's point here. David's point here is that God himself is this land inheritance that David is getting. God himself is the portion. He is the overflowing cup of blessing that we hear about in Psalm 23. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall dwell with me. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This cup of blessing that's what David is talking about. Yahweh is his portion, his cup, his inheritance. God determines the lot of his people and gives to them abundantly by giving them himself. His own self is our inheritance. Jesus came to us and gave himself for us while we were yet sinners, so that we could be made righteous. God gives us himself. He is our inheritance. Moving on to verses 7 and 8. David is now more encouraged. So the chapter is kind of split in two. We have 1 through 6, and then we have 7 through 11. In the first, we have this cry for help. We have a recognized need for a trust in God, and then we see a threat. So there's trust in God, there's a threat, the apostasy in the land, and then there's confidence despite the threat. So we have keep me, God, and then we have the threat in the land of apostasy, and then we have God is my inheritance. No matter what, I will have him. And then it starts all over again in verses 7 through 11. It starts all over again with trust in God, and then a threat, and then this confidence despite the threat. Okay? So 7 is kind of the turning point. David is more encouraged now that this current situation in the land has been kind of resolved in his mind. He's like, I'm not going to commit apostasy. I'm going to stay with Yahweh. He is my inheritance. And he starts realizing that all his blessings are coming from God. But now he turns inward and he looks to the future. And things become more personal now. Most of the verbs shift from present to future tense. And the situation that he is looking at becomes a lot more personal. So he says, I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not, future, be shaken. So David here is depending heavily on God's counsel, even though he is kept awake at night by what is troubling him. God is giving him counsel. In the night, his heart is instructing him. God is like, even though he can't sleep at night, God is instructing him through the night. And this word for instruct is not a very comfortable word. It's kind of like admonishing and like you would to a small child when they do something wrong. Like it's a pretty strong word. And through the night, like David is like awake because this threat that we're about to come to in verses 9 and 10 is really bothering him. But God is there with him even through the night. It's like David is battling a fear he knows God will take care of, and yet the fear is still so strong. As David has wrestled through the dangers of apostasy and has remembered how God provides for him, he is ever more confident that God will also be faithful through this other problem that lies before him. And then the realization breaks upon him that God won't let him be shaken. Why? Because he has determined to keep God always before him. To like remember when God gives them the law and he says, he gives them the Shema, this the Lord our God is one. The Lord our God is one, and he tells them, bind this between your eyes and on your wrists. Paint it on the doorposts of your house. Keep it always before you, so you always remember that I am your God. And this is what David is doing. He's setting the Lord before him so that wherever he turns, he sees Yahweh. And now, because God is at his right hand, he will not be shaken. Or you could say, his throne will not be overthrown. His position as king will not be overthrown. The shaken word is like to be upset, to be turned over. So David, there's something about his throne that David is concerned about. Oh boy. Do we have a USB-C laptop charger by any chance? Some reason my laptop is like draining battery like crazy.
If I knew what a USB-C charger was, I could find one.
Like, kind of like Apple, but it's like this, but I doubt this will charge it. You have one for a laptop? Like, it has to be higher powered for a laptop or a tablet, maybe.
Just do your charge for your laptop. I have one that'll keep it alive.
That could be a situation. Oh, wouldn't be that bad. I'll just keep going as long as I can, and then I'll wing it. It's nodes. Yeah. So I can keep going. I have it all, more or less. All right. Sorry about that. Back to verses 7 and 8. David is confident that his throne will not be overthrown. It's grumbling about it, but it's doing more than not charging, so Okay, so now verses 9 and 10, and this is the like kind of the main focal point, or this is where the psalm really gets serious, and it starts with a therefore. So all of what came before, David is now saying, therefore. And he breaks out in praise with his whole being. So verse 9, therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. Because of God's protection, sovereignty, provision, guidance, and presence that we just looked at in all the previous verses, David is confident now that even his fleshly body is secure. Even his flesh, even his body will be secure. Why is he so worried about his body? For you will not abandon my soul in Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. It's because the reason he's so concerned about his body as king is because he knows death is upon him as king, right? He knows death is upon him. And he knows that to die means going to this place called Sheol, this dark and dismal place where your body rots away and you sink into, in the Hebrew mindset at least, you sink into oblivion. And yet God made a promise to him. Your son will be on the throne forever. And David's concerned about death, about Sheol, about the grave taking over this promise of God. God will not abandon his soul in Sheol or allow his faithful one to experience decay in the pit. This doesn't just mean that God will keep him from dying, but that God will rescue him when he has died. When it says that you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, it indicates that that's where he is, but he won't be abandoned there, right? Like it indicates that the king has reached that point, has reached the point of death, but God won't abandon him there. Now what will God do now? If he's not going to abandon him to Sheol, to death and decay, what's God going to do instead? And that's what verse 11 tells us. Verse 11 says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Instead of death and decay, God will cause him to experience the path of life. It's like the path in the garden leading to the tree of life that Adam and Eve were banned from. Right? They're kicked out of the garden, and this pathway to the tree of life is closed by this cherubim, and they're not allowed to enter that again, to access life, eternal life. And here David is saying, God himself is going to not only take him out of death, he's going to show him the path of life. This isn't just a return to life as usual, like a glitch in the matrix or like a momentary weird happening of some sort. No, it's not like he had some crazy hallucination that he's dead for a bit and then it's like, oh, actually life is continuing as usual. No, this kind of life is different. It's abounding with joy, and it's life in God's very presence. In your presence there is fullness of joy. Not only that, it is at God's right hand. The right hand of God, the right hand of a king, is a coveted place of authority and benefit. So when you had a position in the ancient Near East at a king's right hand, you were like one of his advisors, and you had authority to the point where you were like a vice regent, a co-ruler under the king's authority. You were positioned at his right hand. You could advise the king, and you could also have some authority to rule as long as it was under his authority. And so David here is saying, not only do I get life after death, but I'm in God's presence, and not only in his presence, I'm at his right hand with this position of authority. All right, so that's Psalm 16. So what's going on here? Does David actually think that he is going to die and God won't abandon him? Is David an egotistical king who's freaked out of dying himself and comes to this place of like some naive hope or trust that he won't? No, that's not the case. Peter explains. Turn to Acts chapter 2. Verse 23. Peter here is defending Jesus as Messiah, and he says, "This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by hands of lawless men. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. For David says concerning him," David says concerning Jesus, "I saw the Lord always before me, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken." And here he's quoting directly from Psalm 16. "Therefore my heart was glad and my tongue rejoiced. My flesh also will dwell in hope." The reason the wording is slightly different is because Peter's taking it from the Septuagint instead of the Hebrew Bible, and so there's slight word variation. "You will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the paths of life," etc. And then Peter says in verse 29, "Brothers, I may say to you with confidence about the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Being therefore a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that he would set one of his descendants on his throne, he foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of Christ, the Messiah, the anointed king to come, that he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption." Hades is merely the Greek word for the Hebrew word Sheol. So in Hebrew it's Sheol, in Greek it's Hades. For English, sadly, it's often translated hell, but that's not what it is. It's like the underworld place of the dead, basically. This Jesus, God raised up, and of that we all are witnesses. So Peter here, according to Peter, David is not just talking about himself, but prophetically about his dynasty, his son that God had promised would be king forever. David is most certainly dead and decayed in the grave. But David talks in first person about the future messianic king. Why does he talk in first person? Because he knows that this is the Davidite king, the king of David's lineage that God promised would reign forever. And we can look at 2 Samuel 7. We could, I don't think we will look at 2 Samuel 7, where God initially comes to David and gives him the covenant. You will have a son. He will dwell on he will be on the throne forever. His dynasty will be forever. And then he goes on to say that this person will sin, and so we're like, oh, well, That's not Jesus. That's Solomon. But how is he on the throne forever? It's a little bit confusing. But then if we look at and turn to 1 Chronicles 17, this covenant is reiterated again by another writer, a later writer. 1 Chronicles 17:10. Towards the end of the verse. Moreover, I declare to you that the Lord will build you a house. When your days are fulfilled to walk with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, one of your own sons. This is Nathan bringing the word of the Lord to David. And I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. I will not take my steadfast love from him, as I took from him who was before you. But I will confirm him in my house and in my kingdom forever, and his throne shall be established forever. This is what David is thinking about. This is the covenant David has in mind. And now he's like, wait a minute, there's a problem. One of my sons is going to be on the throne forever. That's what God promised. But there's a problem between that being able to happen and the reality that David knows. That problem is death. If it's going to be a human son of David on the throne forever, what about death? Years later, after the kingdom has fallen apart, foreign nations, Babylon, has come in and taken control of Israel. An Ezrahite, whatever that means, named Ethan, writes another psalm, Psalm 89. And he puts this fear in really clear words. Psalm 89. Starting in like verse 35, I think it is. He reiterates the covenant. He says, once for all I have sworn by my holiness, I will not lie to David. His offspring shall endure forever, his throne as long as the sun before me. So he's reiterating the covenant that God made to David. And then in verse 38, this Ethan gets upset. He's like, but now, God, you have cast off and rejected your anointed one, your Messiah. You've rejected your Messiah. Look around. You renounced the covenant with your servant. You have defiled his crown in the dust. Israel is broken. There is no more king. Israel has been torn down. Jerusalem, the temple, everything is just shattered. And this psalmist is like, what happened to this Davidic covenant? And again, he goes down through, I won't read it all, but he goes down through just going on and on and on about how the kingdom looks now. The king has been brought down to complete decimation. He is no more. And then in verse 45, he says, you have cut short the days of his youth. You have covered him with shame. Verse 48, he says, what man can live forever, or what man can live and never see death? Who can deliver his soul from the power of Sheol? Lord, where is your steadfast love of old, which by your faithfulness you swore to David? And so here the same problem again is in view, that this Davidite king was supposed to be on the throne forever, but death, the grave, humans die. And so we're left with, how is this possible, God? How could you say this, and yet humans die? So it should be clear by now that we're talking about Jesus, that David is looking forward and he's saying, I don't know how this all works. Humans die. I don't know how this is all going to work. And then he realizes, I can trust God. And somehow, this Davidite king, he is going to die, yes. He's going to die and he's going to experience, he's going to be in Sheol, in this holding place of the dead. But he won't be abandoned there. And he won't see corruption. What is corruption? Just decay. His body won't decay there. And this is one of the biggest, I did this whole word study of Sheol in the Old Testament, and it's one of the biggest fears of the Old Testament writers is that they would be buried in the ground and simply rot away. And it's inconceivable in the Hebrew mind that you would want to leave behind your earthly body for some disembodied existence somewhere. Like they don't want anything to do with that. Their body is who they are. And to be buried in the ground and to rot away is a horror, a terror to them. In this study, though, I found that what they really believed clearly is that, yes, the wicked will remain in Sheol and will rot away, but the righteous will be delivered from Sheol. The righteous will not be there forever. They will be delivered from Sheol. And they had this hope, and this is the hope that David is expressing. You won't abandon your faithful one. You won't let your faithful one see this rotting away, these worms, this dust, this decay of death. You're going to take him out of the grave. That's Jesus. Jesus comes in a very crazy and paradoxical way. He is enthroned on the cross. He goes into the grave, but he's not abandoned there. He is brought out. He is resurrected. He doesn't see decay. And Paul and Peter both dwell a lot on this point of he saw Sheol, but he didn't decay. His body didn't decay there. It was only 3 days. He wasn't decayed yet. And God took him out and restored his body. His flesh dwells secure because God is a keeping God. However, the wicked, there is a day coming when Sheol, with all the wicked in it, after the righteous have been brought out, Sheol, all of Sheol, along with the devil and along with death itself, will be taken and cast into the lake of fire. That is Judgment Day. And I think biblically, afterlife currently, there's this concept of a holding place. We see it a little bit in the rich man and Lazarus, of a holding place where there is maybe perhaps some level of consciousness. For the wicked, it's just a terrifying level of we don't know what's going to happen. For the righteous, there's this hope of we will be rescued. And that's how it works. The righteous are rescued from that, and then all of Sheol, along with the devil, along with death itself, at the end are all taken and dumped into the lake of fire and consumed. And judgment is done forever. However, what I really want to focus in the last few minutes is verse 11. Verse 11 of Psalm 16. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. While it's a little bit unclear sometimes what is going on in the afterlife, like between now and final judgment, what is super clear in the Bible is that resurrection, like I said, is for all the righteous, not just Jesus. Those who follow Jesus follow this same path. If we are trusting in God for refuge, for provision, trusting in Him as Lord, trusting in Him as our counselor, as David is, trusting in Him that His presence keeps us from being shaken. If we are trusting in Yahweh, we too, yes, we will die, but we too will also be raised up out of the grave to the path of life, into the presence of God, and to His right hand to rule. And in closing, I want to take you to Revelation 22. I was really struck in studying this verse, verse 11, that this is like David is basically giving this small kind of veiled picture of what we get in Revelation 22. In Revelation 22, we have the end of all things in the world as we know it. The new creation has come. The new Jerusalem has come down from heaven. God is dwelling with His people again. And in the vision, the angel is showing John around this new reality of the new creation. And listen to this. Listen to the parallels with verse 11. So remember, we have the path of life. We have the presence of God. And in Hebrew, the presence of God is it doesn't actually say in His presence. It says in front of His face, right? That's how the Hebrew says in the presence of, is in front of the face of. And then, so we have the path of life in the face of God or before the face of God, and we have at His right hand. Now listen to this. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. So here we have access to the tree of life again. This path that was barred in the Garden of Eden is now open again, and people have access to eternal life from the tree of life. This tree, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and His servants will worship Him. They will see His face. They will be in His presence, and His name will be on their foreheads, and night will be no more. They will need no light of lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and then they will reign forever and ever. So we have all three of these elements here of access once more to the path of life. We have being in the presence of God, and we have reigning with God. And this is the hope that David had looking forward. If you read the covenant that God gave to David in 2 Samuel, David clearly knows that he's going to die. But he also knows that one of his sons will not die. Jesus Christ came as a son of David. He died. He rose from the dead. He ascended to rule with God at his right hand. And the same thing happens to us when we trust in him. Thank you.